It's an entire donut hole in the carbon world, in that less than 1% of all carbon credits come from agriculture at all, and 0.03% of carbon credits come from sustainable or regenerative agricultural transition practices.
Welcome to the Regeneration Will Be Funded. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're having conversations about regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. How can we build an economy that's in service to life? Brought to you by Ma Earth. You can find all of our conversations at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. Today's conversation is with Josh Knauer, co-founder of ReSeed, a carbon solution provider focused on bringing carbon credits from farmers to market. In this discussion, Josh helps us understand why carbon credits from soil and small-scale farming is so important, and yet not part of the current carbon credit landscape. He shares how ReSeed is bringing innovations into this space with its two new credit classes. We get into the nuts and bolts of how all of this works, and I pepper Josh with questions and common criticisms that we often hear of the carbon markets. I think there are a lot of interesting ideas in here. Let's dive right in with Josh Knauer. We're here today with Josh Knauer. He's the co-founder of ReSeed. Thanks, Josh, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Just as a quick context setting, help people understand, what were you doing before ReSeed and how did you come into this work?
So I've been an impact entrepreneur working at the intersection of emerging technology and social and environmental change for the past 30 years. I've started mostly for-profit businesses in the space. I have two that I started and then subsequently sold to publicly traded companies, grew to scale and then sold them. And took some time off after I sold my last company. It was quite a run. And when you do these things, you need to relax sometimes and just take a couple deep breaths. And I came back to work that I had been doing early in the early days of my last company, where we were in Brazil working with an indigenous tribe, trying to help them figure out how to create carbon credits and sell them to the world based on the protection of the forest area in which they live. And that project was both at once inspiring, and you could really see how the potential for market-driven forces to work at that scale. But then also witnessed a lot of the problems that exist, inherent problems that exist in what I call the legacy carbon credit world. And legacy in that it's becoming history and quickly, in that it's not really working and it's faltering in a lot of ways. Not all of it, but some of it. So in that context, the problem that I saw, that is what I was sort of ruminating on after I sold my last company, was that carbon markets and market-based solutions for ecosystem services weren't benefiting the exact people that help protect and help steward the most land and thus the most carbon. And that is, frankly, just farmers in general. It's an entire donut hole in the carbon world, in that less than 1% of all carbon credits come from agriculture at all, and 0.03% of carbon credits come from sustainable or regenerative agricultural transition practices. So if that isn't happening, and those are the people, there are 600 million farms, smallholder farms in the world, 2 billion people, family members who live on those farms and work those farms, and almost all of them live at or below the poverty level in the country in which they are. So there's this huge disparity of poor people who are interacting with land and stewarding it that are excluded because the carbon markets are incredibly complicated. They're expensive. They take way too long to pay out to farmers. And I've been saying this for years, but they're based on bad science. And it doesn't mean that all carbon credits have to be based on bad science. That's not it. But the ones that have become the most popular, basically, are not, in fact, achieving the goals that people want. And there's getting a lot of public publicity around that these days.
Yeah. And why is it, do you think, that the legacy carbon markets developed in a way that has missed so much of the science and leaves out soil and farming?
So I think what it really comes down to is that there was a lot of good research done around climate change and market-driven solutions for climate change. And the idea of creating this balancing act of, people in the Western world are, no matter what we do, and I'm not saying don't do things, but I'm just saying even after we eliminate fossil fuels, and we still will have emissions, right? And there's still, because of our lives, there will be a lot more emissions than we think. And so what we need to do is, as companies are reducing those emissions, which is fantastic, as when individuals in their homes are reducing their own personal emissions, the space between where they are and net zero has to be filled with somebody in the world that is actually doing the work of removing and protecting carbon in the ground. And so basically, carbon credits were created to do that. And carbon credits were based, and the science behind a lot of them are based on forward-looking models. Take the next, we want to protect this bit of land or, forest for the next 20, guarantee permanence, which will be for the next, 20, 50, 100 years. Those sound like a very long period of time. But we're going to base all of our future-based models of predictions of how that's going to go on models, climate models that were created for 500 and 1,000-year climate models. It's great science. There's nothing wrong with it in the slightest. But really what happened is the finance guys came in, right? And they came in and they looked at these 500 and 1,000-year models and like, great, we can create a financial instrument called a carbon credit off of it. We'll base it on this whole, and the whole thing is just based on science that was never meant to be used. And modeling is a very complicated thing, and data is a very complicated thing as it leads to modeling. So we can get off into deep, complex land. But the reality is that there's a better way. And what we have come up with is the first nature-based carbon credit model that is based on two main factors, which is performance-based. It's what happened on that land over the past year and measuring that, and providing the financial incentives to the people on that land, get them paid quickly, get them paid equitably, so that we can financially incentivize them to keep going. And in our world, we see carbon, and we describe this to our farmers in this way, it's a crop, right? It's not a crop you're removing from your land. It's quite the opposite, actually. But basically, every year, you plant some seeds into our system, which is, in this case, in our world, are seeds of knowledge. Our farmers, through an app that we give them, enter information that they know really well about their farm. That data goes up into our AI cloud-driven, fancy system that allows us to create very precise measurements of that carbon in the plants, the vegetation, and the soil. And then basically at the end of that year, they get paid when the carbon credits are sold. Our carbon credits get generated. We're tracking from the beginning. The baseline isn't only about the land and the climate stuff, but it's also about the socioeconomic state of that family. So we use the IPCC's model for doing that, and we track dozens of variables about our farmers, everything from obviously household income, access to medical treatment and medical services, access to clean and safe drinking water, many, many things, financial services and ag tech services, and just a lot of different types of variables. And we're tracking the changes of those over time. And our goal is to focus on proving that those farmers, by participating in this process, are less vulnerable than they were when they started. And we can do that from just year 1 to year 2. And of course, through every 5-year cycle that we do, we're measuring it on an ongoing basis. We're able to keep those farmers stable on their land, keep them from being forced off that land, which would cause all of the carbon, or the vast majority of carbon that they're storing on that land, to become bulldozed, basically, and burned, and then turned into, in many cases, in the areas we work, either soy plantations or palm oil. And none of us want that. None of us eat the soybeans or the palm oil that comes off of, that's for feeding animals and all kinds of other things. What we're actually doing when we allow that to happen is the farmers that feed us, feed 70 to 80% of the world, smallholder farmers, we're disrupting our own food system. And that's very, very dangerous. So there's all these benefits, co-benefits that come from doing the right thing. And everybody in our model makes money along the way. We balance out, we're a for-profit company, and we balance out, it's in our bylaws and it's in our mission, we balance out the needs of farmers, climate, and profit. And if we can do that along the way, you create a financial instrument that is incredibly valuable to all of the parties involved, and everybody is played equitably. So our farmers get the bulk of the revenue from the transaction, and they are able to, have their lives changed very quickly by participating. And you might be interested to know, like the first question farmers ask once they get their first payment from us, and this is to the farmer, is this is great. I get it. This is like a crop now, right? You just paid me for the corn or the maize or the pineapples that I put out into the market. How do I get more of it? Right? And that is where additionality comes in, right? They want to get more of these payments and be rewarded for having more carbon. And so the only way to do that is to implement regenerative farming practices. And so what we advise many of our farmers, and it's just advice, it's not, we don't force them to do it, but if they just take 20% of that first year's income that they get from us and just buy different types of seed, or there's any number of different practices that they can undertake, which we help them think through. They're going to have more carbon within the next year. So, they see that reward. Farmers are the best business people on the planet, I've learned. And so, if you provide them with the right incentives, then we've solved that problem of like how to engage with the largest number of landholders. I don't know if you realize 80% of all deforestation in the world happens from the loss of smallholder farmer land. So it's, we're solving a bunch of problems at once, right. And doing it in a way in which, investors and bankers and, the people who are driving the, sort of emissions-driven economy, they can make actually more money by working with systems like ours. And we want this to be a model that others will copy, and we all need to be doing everything all at once to solve this problem.
Right. Well, thanks for that. I mean, that you said a lot, but it's a good summary and starting place. And, you and I just met. I'm just learning about ReSeed, so some of my questions may be a bit basic. But I'd love to make sure that I understand the full flow and how it works, and then maybe get into some of the nitty-gritty questions. So effectively, what I hear you saying is legacy carbon credit market is clearly not serving, humanity's needs. Not addressing soil, not addressing farmers. And that's squarely where you're kind of orienting your focus.
Yes.
Proprietary methodology that you've developed in terms of defining what a credit is, or two types of credits.
So actually, just to be clear, that part of it isn't proprietary. We have a protocol that we've published that under ICROA's sort of rules of how a protocol becomes a standard. We are engaged in an open community process. That's a community design process for the protocol to become a standard.
Got it.
And so the definitions, even the methodologies that we use, a whole bunch of things are actually not proprietary. Yes, we authored it, but as we speak, there are several governments in the world that are taking our protocol and writing it into legislation so that it becomes a standard within that country for agricultural carbon measurement. We love that.
Right, of course.
And it's great for our business, of course, but others can join in too. And, we will not, this is not about being a monopoly in the space. There are hundreds of millions of these farms all around the world that we can be working with. And quite frankly, humanity needs the help to be able to get to all those farms. And,
So gap in the market around credit classes. And so you went and designed and authored your own in tandem with the communities that you're in relationship with, and pursuing it with an open ethos and a standards-based approach, and really two different types of credits you said that currently exist. And I want to ask more questions about that. And so those credits are being purchased by voluntary markets, I presume?
Currently by the voluntary markets, as soon as possible, and we are pushing towards that. We are working on getting our credits recognized on the regulatory markets as well. And once again, that is for validation purposes, but it's also economic. Our baseline protection credit sells for $20. A removal credit, which is a sequestration measurement, sells for $40 a ton right now. If we were to move into, ultimately the EU market is one of the best regulated markets for us to be in. And, the last I looked, they were trading at 89 euros a ton. And so that just means, that 50% of that sales price is, going to go to the farmer. And obviously is a lot better for the farmer than $20 a ton. And so voluntary markets are great, and there's always a place for them. We want to see it expand. Places like the United States, where there is no, California has a regulatory market, but not at a federal level, certainly, and no other states that I'm aware of do. Voluntary markets make a lot of sense. But we're seeing a lot of emergence of regulated markets in other places, and it's encouraging, actually. I'm a big fan. I think it's important to have really high touch between government sort of standard setting and keeping an eye on things to make sure the level, the playing field is level, and the private sector, which can innovate and move ahead and do all kinds of cool things, like write up a new protocol that is a completely new approach that actually does follow all the rules of the carbon markets. It's just we're doing it in a way that makes more sense.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Microsoft or corporation, whomever wants to offset emissions, achieve net zero targets, goes into the voluntary market to buy credits, looks at the voluntary market of credit options and says, oh, we like this protection units from ReSeed, or we like these sequestration units at $40 a ton or $20 a ton.
Yep.
They buy those units. You then are using that revenue and saying to farmers, okay, here's the monetary value that is available.
Yes.
You're providing half of that into those farmers, and basically farmer comes in and says, okay, great, downloads the app of ReSeed, inputs information about what's going on the farm. We'd love to also understand a bit more of what that information is. And then essentially post de facto, after the year is up, and they can verify, presumably through some sort of MRV systems that are integrated with you, information that shows that protection happened, or that sequestration happened, then they get their payout for their crop, their new carbon crop.
Right.
And then they go, oh, Josh, I really like getting paid for carbon. Is there any other opportunities to increase our crop yield? And this kind of then creates the flywheel or the snowball of, okay, well, how do we adopt more regenerative ag practices and increase our carbon sequestration at the small farm or holder level?
Definitely. And so it stacks within the farm in terms of increased carbon, and farmers talk to their neighbors and their communities and see that this is happening. And basically there's an organic growth, if you will, that takes place within the community. And the goal is to get as many farmers in communities as possible practicing regenerative agriculture. It ends up, especially in, we have new projects launching in the next year that are where there are farmers that are, we're sort of working with farmer cooperatives that are located as they're considered buffer zones around, pristine natural areas that, the big conservation organizations are trying to figure out how to protect, and the governments are trying to figure out how to protect. And what we're doing is saying, okay, buffer protection is really, really important. So let's go to all the farmers that are within, whatever range of buffer that is needed for that natural area, and let's try to get to them. And as word spreads about the work that we're doing, about the increases in revenue, finding new farmer communities is very easy. What is difficult sometimes, especially in the voluntary market, is finding companies that are willing to and want to actually take substantive action that is at a price point that is where the carbon markets need to be.
Right.
Carbon, as part of an overall strategy of emissions reduction for a company, should be the most expensive part of the process. And so when you see sub $20 carbon credits being sold, basically that's the bargain basement stuff. It's a lot cheaper for many companies to buy a $2 carbon credit, which unfortunately you can get on the market today, and just continue plowing ahead with your pollution and all the things that you normally do. That is a problem, right? That exists in the carbon market today. And pricing, for example, and making sure that fair pricing that is driving the action that carbon credits were originally designed to take is also a problem in the market that just has to be fixed. It can't be treated as just a standard commodity market where price fluctuations go all over the place. If you have a goal of getting to specific types of targets. Economics would say that you need to make sure you have a floor in your pricing so that you're, once again, the most expensive part of the process, but one that is necessary and needed if we're going to get to net zero.
Right. So I'm going to do my best to voice what I hear as kind of the objections at each stage of these things, and just as a way to try to understand how you're thinking about it and strategies. But yeah, just on that last point about we can't treat it like just a normal commodity market. One thing we're hearing a lot is this distinction of whether carbon credits should be allowed to be traded or whether they should be retired at purchase. Starting there, what's your take on that?
So it's best for carbon credits to be retired immediately. Our opinion is that if you're going to have trading, that secondary trading of a carbon credit. So, there's a first sale of carbon credits that has to take place somewhere, right? And typically now, that happens through trading desks and through sort of an open market exchange where you don't even know how many times that carbon credit has changed hands. And, there's no real transparency in that at all. It's completely black box. We believe, and what we're facilitating at this point is we sell a product, right? That product has a bunch of services associated with it. You can buy that product directly from us if you would like to, right? You don't have to go to a trading desk or in some, system, that's been set up for this around the world. But we do not force people to retire the credits. If they do buy our credits and then with the intent of reselling again, which we can get into, there's a lot of reasons why you want to encourage that actually. I will get to that in a second. But basically what we do is we, in the contract of the original purchase of that carbon credit, and it's durable, it sticks with the carbon credit forever, our farmers get paid a percentage of every subsequent transaction on those credits.
Got it.
And we have a lot of traders that have complained about that to us. That's not, what are you doing? And why would you do this to me? And I can't maximize my profit. And it's yeah, you're going to make a lot of money off of that. It's okay. Our farmers getting 5 to 10% cut basically of every subsequent transaction is actually placing the economics where they're supposed to be aligned to climate action. Our farmers receiving that money, once again, they then will be well incentivized to invest more in regenerative agriculture because they want to keep going.
Right. So if we're at the cusp of a market that goes from 20, 40 to 200 to 400, the farmers at least get a portion of that upside that may also be captured, by the speculators who are trying to bring the demand.
In the beginning of this conversation, we talked about we have to hack existing systems, right? Market-driven systems are based on markets. We could have a very good and deep conversation, and I'm happy to do it. But if we're talking about the next 100 years, 100 years from now, if we survive, is capitalism the right model? Love those conversations and happy to talk about it. But in the next 5 to 7 years, when we have to be taking these actions, like right now, it's what we've got. So how do you harness that? How do you make it so that everybody along the way benefits instead of just a few people, right? And those traders in our world make a lot of money. They're just making a tiny fraction less because for equity, right? To make sure that the people who are providing that raw material, doing all the actual work that's involved, are getting compensated for the fact that somebody's speculating off of that work. And if you do that, as far as we're concerned, that feels very equitable. It feels like the responsible thing to do. And it also, once again, motivates all of the right behaviors that we want to take place.
Right. Okay. So another criticism I hear is that, you mentioned at the beginning, was it 0.03% of all carbon credits coming from regenerative ag?
Yep.
And, I helped steward a farm. I'm a big believer in regen ag. And yet, a criticism I hear is that if you look at how much carbon can be sequestered on an annual basis times anything that resembles current market pricing per ton, that we can't really see an uplift in unit economics that is going to meaningfully move the dial, especially in countries like the United States on a per hectare basis. What would you say to all of that?
So basically, yes, those are challenges, right, that exist in this space. And what I can only speak to the answer that how we've tried to answer this challenge,
Sure.
right? Which is when you break from this orthodoxy of having just focusing on sequestration,
Mm-hmm.
what you're not doing is compensating and recognizing that farmers provide a valuable and have been for generations on that land. I mean, just to give you an idea, most of our current farmers have been on their land, their families have been on that land for over 300 years, right? So these are smallholder farmers are literally the bedrock of their communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that all of that work that has been done up to date has led to the current carrying capacity that they have. Think of it as a battery, right? Where plants are kind of the solar panel. I mean, this is the way photosynthesis actually works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones that are doing the transaction with carbon dioxide, turning it into, oxygen, and carbon goes down into the plant and into the soil,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're going to effectively measure that as a system, you want to measure the act of storing it, the battery, if you will, for the carbon, where it's all being stored. And you want to be measuring the carbon that is being collected along the way through the vegetative material that's on that farm. So photosynthesis basically is what we want, right? Healthy photosynthesis takes place when you have healthy soils. And so the relationship between soil and the plants that are up in the vegetation that are on the surface is very important to understand from a scientific perspective how it all works together.
Right.
And then you have to take into account the socioeconomic side of things, which is if that farmer, and we only work with farmers that meet this requirement, which is the IPCC Vulnerability Index, which measures the likelihood of that farmer being on their land being pushed off their land in the near future. If that farmer leaves that land, 9 times out of 10, if not 100% of the time, bad things, emissions are going to take place when that land is bulldozed and burned. And this is just what happens in the communities in which we work. And we do the community surveys and we do all of the background work that is needed to show that as a thing. So you have to be able to, we're showing that we're stabilizing things. Now, I will admit, we don't have any farms in the United States yet. And in the beginning of this, I thought, this won't work in the United States because farmers in the United States must make, they're probably not that vulnerable. And I don't think there's land baron type activity going on here where people are literally being killed, and threatened to leave their lands. And then we started exploring in the United States what's actually happening. And in the United States, and so the place that we'll be launching in the United States in the next year is in Appalachia. And when you look at the socioeconomic conditions in Appalachia of farmers, the average household income of a small farmer small family farmer in Appalachia is $2,500 a year from their crops. That's it. And all of them, I believe, are forced to take on other work outside of the farm in order to make ends meet. And so basically, smallholder farm loss in the United States is actually happening at the same rates as it is happening in other countries that in Africa and South America and Central America in which we work. In West Virginia, there's that average household income of smallholder farmers, right, from the agricultural product of $2,500. And West Virginia, over the past 6 years, has lost 10% of those small farmers. They have left their land. And what that land becomes and what comes of it, we are not far enough into our process yet to be able to make that claim yet. That I don't think it's burned necessarily, and maybe it's not as many of the tons of carbon there are as emissions, but there definitely is a loss. And so we think that showing that and proving that is going to be how we are able to justify this methodology here in the United States. And we are moving forward pretty aggressively because the need is great. Smallholder farmers around the world feed the rest of us.
Right.
And basically these big industrial farms that exist to feed animals. Right. And I'm not here to make an argument about being vegan and all the rest. I mean, it is proven to be a better life. I'm not vegan, so I can't say anything about that really. But the point is that supporting small farmers, even that produce animals as part of their product of the land, is so much more effective and efficient than these big industrial operations that are kind of
Right.
destroying everything. And,
Right.
in
Okay.
fact,
So what I hear you saying is that, yes, there is validity to the unit economics critique, especially if you're just looking at the narrow slice of United States large scale farming. But the current context in which we sit in 2023 is that small farms help feed the world,
yes,
that there are a lot of small landholder farms across the world that are highly vulnerable to being removed from their land. And many of them have been on their lands for many generations. And so they provide a vital service from an ecosystem and from feeding people perspective. And so this is one of the key, insights that I am gathering is driving ReSeed is to say we need to put an economic value into recognizing the holistic benefits that those farmers provide.
That's
and
correct.
looking at socioeconomic factors in addition to just tracking carbon in the soil.
absolutely.
And in that fullness of context, we want those farmers to stay there. And the opposite, the alternative is that we've seen when these farmers are removed from their land, bad things tend to happen. Crops are burned, palm oil, large scale industrial farming operations, very extractive and so forth. And presumably, so because you're working, and so, your defining methodology here is the IPCC Vulnerability Index, and your dollars per ton matters because we're talking about, some of the least resourced financially, farmers on the planet. So from a unit economics basis, they do care, and it does matter to them, the checks that they get. So in that frame, I guess, one of the key criticisms that Verra received this year, or that the legacy carbon credit systems received, is baselining and the inability to really understand the counterfactual, right? Like, how do we know what the deforestation of a given area would have been had Verra and their credits been involved or not? And what I hear you saying is that a key premise of this protection credit is based on an unknowable counterfactual that is essentially based on the evidence that is being afforded through IPCC's Vulnerability Index. Is that a fair assessment?
It is fair, and I think just taking a step further, when you're dealing, it's much easier to see the evidence over a long period of time of what happens when smallholder farmers leave their land. There are
we have a lot of data.
A lot of data.
Right.
Since look at any colonialist, we can go back hundreds of years to the colonial expansion around the world. What happens when the people who know how to manage the land are pushed off that land? Humanity does not have a good track record there. There is a way to measure that vulnerability and likelihood. It is widely accepted as the right way to do this. That is very responsible. There is no right way that we know of to do that for avoided deforestation, for example. So we do not use avoided deforestation in our methodology, specifically. And so that's how we have been able to sort of sidestep, that there are problems with how the baseline methodology leading to the models that become the baseline for the models that are projected out 20, 50, 100 years into the future. If you're starting with really bad data and you're building a financial product that is, estimating what will happen 50 years from now, you're going to miss that target by a lot. And my understanding of those targets right now and why many of the credits that have been accredited, and issued in the past have missed targets by 60 to 80% by the time that project is done. It's because you started on a really bad foundation.
Right.
The one other way that we address this problem is to say, got it. Let's not use the baseline as the religion for 20 to 50 years out. Let's literally look at it every year and let's correct for it every 5 years if there's an issue. And basically what it causes is a stepladder approach towards a decrease of vulnerability for those farmers that basically says every 5 years, there's a new baseline right? And whatever the net new that happened in that 5-year period, those are the removal credits. And then when we come to the next baseline, they all become baseline credits. And then, that if you get paid for protecting, in the next 5-year cycle.
Okay, so I get excited about the premise of protecting these farms, and it sounds like a creative and fresh approach in the space. One of my initial concerns, and maybe I just don't fully understand it, but still drilling down on this baseline idea, if a current farm is doing what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and now ReSeed, we're coming in and saying, okay, we're going to provide this protection unit
Mm-hmm.
To continue to do what you're doing, because otherwise we see that you're highly vulnerable, and we might have essentially lost your vital services to
Yep.
the collective. If you're packaging that as a ton of carbon,
Mm-hmm.
and then Microsoft is purchasing it and saying, oh, we just removed in this orthodoxy of sequestration, but that orthodoxy is driving the voluntary markets and probably the regulated markets in some ways in terms of the demand function.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, we didn't actually remove a new ton of carbon. We just avoided potential destruction. So
Yep.
collectively, we achieved some positive aim.
Yes.
But are we risking muddying the waters in terms of thinking about carbon and carbon sequestration and net zero?
So basically what we need to do is think through what that demand side should be calling for. Right. Because if we only think about removal of carbon from the atmosphere, which is something that has to happen, let's just be clear. It's very, very important. We have gigatons and gigatons of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, put there from 150 years of industrial revolution, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
That's all very clear. And yes, it is a great goal to actively remove carbon from the atmosphere. It is something that is of high value if you're able to show that you've actually been able to do it, which is why we have those carbon credits and we do sell those at a higher price.
Mm-hmm.
It is equally as important to make sure that there is a baseline and that baseline is maintained.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the reason why the agriculture has not been able to be engaged is because there is no recognition of that baseline.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are working with a food company that wants to, inset buy carbon credits from the farmers that are in their supply chain, which is a wonderful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they are how they apply our carbon credits to their carbon balance sheets.
Mm-hmm.
That is their business, right? That is not our business. We are just clearly selling a credit,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, 2 different classes of credit that have a clear, transparent, and openly public definition of what they are,
Mm-hmm.
and how those companies try to apply them to their carbon balance sheets specifically is up to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that may seem like a cop-out, and I understand that,
Mm-hmm.
right? That I'm just shoveling it off on somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But that is actually better,
Yep.
I would argue.
Yep.
Because basically our claim that is being made about the 2 classes of carbon credits are crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
There is no obfuscation. There's no mixing of things.
Right.
It is very, very clear what it is that you're buying or not buying.
Protection unit and
a
sequestration
removal
unit
or
is
sequestration unit.
Right.
And so the challenge
Mm-hmm.
that I would put out to the industry
Mm-hmm.
is that this obsession with
Right.
only additionality
Right.
and permanence and the very flawed definitions of both that exist out of the industry from the buy side are harming more than they're helping the overall world. If we can get farmers engaged in this economic process through this protection credit model, which is the way that they get paid quickly for things, if farmers are asked that and say, well, you have to stop. I don't know if you realize, like, farmers can't even get credits from the agricultural lands. They have to get it from the trees that are growing on their land, right? Because we only really do forest-based carbon,
Totally.
when it comes to these things.
Totally.
Soil-based carbon and recognizing the vitality of soil also in the traditional models only values net new carbon, which basically means you kind of can't be doing your agriculture because there's fluctuations that take place in soil carbon when you do agriculture, and there's no accounting for any of that. So the reality versus the theory just doesn't match.
Right. Yeah. No, I completely resonate with that, and it's the same as what's happening in old growth forests. And conservation is such an obvious action for us to take.
Yes.
You have ecosystems that have taken thousands and tens of thousands
Yes.
and hundreds of thousands of years to develop, and yet they're not qualifying for a lot of these ecological credit classes because we can't prove additionality.
Correct.
And it's like, well, yes, but they provide a very, very vital ecological service.
Exactly. And this gets to the question of what do we value? Right. So an old growth forest doesn't exist to pull down a lot of net new carbon, quite frankly.
No.
There's a carbon cycle taking place all the time, and they are huge inhalers, if you will, of carbon, and then exhaling oxygen. And then, I tell my kids this way, pooping the carbon into the ground, basically. That's not scientific, but but basically, if we want to think about what are we trying to incentivize when we're dealing with different types of ecosystems, for example, what you want really is for companies to value biodiversity, right? Biodiversity is a much better mechanism of measurement to protect old growth forests, right? Biodiversity and health of soil. We should be doing soil-based credits, right? And we've been looking at watershed credits, and we've been looking, for there's tens of thousands of gallons of water that are stored during rain events for every ton of carbon that you are able to show exists in that soil, right? So if we want to value these things, then let's talk about and measure the things that we actually want to value, instead of this false narrative that, quite frankly, that there's one solution fits all for how we approach these markets.
Right. So it seems like the industry, I'm hearing that it's getting obsessed with permanence, some of the buyers, and it's almost like this feeling of like, they want to just be very clear that the carbon has been pulled out of the atmosphere, shot down into the middle of the earth for 10,000 years. And so, gosh, we got to build big factories to go do this. And the pushback is, well, we have nature-based solutions. They're here. Let's invest in these right now. And rather than think about, scaling up multi-billion-dollar factory, direct air stuff. Well, some people say, nope, we need all of the above. But yeah, I guess the inability of the legacy carbon credits market to provide enough assurance around permanence is somewhat creating a reaction towards wanting more permanence, which unfortunately has the negative effect of maybe not investing in things that are part of a cycle. It's like it's an ongoing relationship.
Absolutely. What markets, if you just are looking at ones and zeros and dollar signs and all the rest, and you ignore the natural systems that we're trying to restore, because that is fundamentally what we're trying to do to create balance. You have to understand that every living thing on the planet breathes, right? Trees breathe, plants breathe, rivers, oceans are breathing in, exhaling all, oxygen up into the air, are inhaling carbon dioxide. Oceans, just to be clear, are the largest sink, should be the largest sink where we want to be making sure to restore the balance that used to exist of carbon being pulled out of the atmosphere by our oceans. But also understand there's emissions that happen naturally from the oceans as well. It's a breathing that happens between, any of these different systems.
Right.
And when you try to apply sort of this very linear thinking that is not at all in sync with what actually is happening on the ground in reality, then and you're using bad science to try to prove that, or using science to try to prove this linear thing that doesn't actually exist, bad things come about, right? And the problems emerge. Direct air capture, which is the mechanical carbon capture work of trying to capture carbon as it's coming out of a smokestack, or literally, the large, it's they're basically huge vacuums, up and look like a smokestack, but it's sucking down very large amounts of carbon dioxide and trying to mimic photosynthesis in a way, in a technological way. It is wildly less efficient. One of our farmers, maybe a couple of our farmers, can store and also, over time remove more carbon than will ever come through the plant in Iceland that's, operating right now. I mean, they're doing 4,000 tons of, the goal is 4,000 tons of carbon that they're, pulling down from the atmosphere. That type of removal can be achieved, in a small community in Brazil, right? And so if you multiply that out, cost versus, people say, well, it's too hard to organize these farmers and it's too hard to get this to scale and all the rest. We're proving that that's not true. We have 10,000 farmers in Brazil that we are working with. We've been working with for about the last year and a half. All of them are actively engaged in this process. We're starting to sell bring their carbon credits to market. There's 4 million metric tons of carbon that we'll be bringing to market over the next couple of years from those farmers. And so, that is staggeringly large amount from such a small number of communities, basically, in which we're working. And this scales to all 600 million farms globally if we wanted to.
Right. But so back to what I hear, the common critiques. Another critique is that our understanding of soil carbon is not so established. And that, measuring these things is very difficult. And so when you make those types of claims, like what is the basis of that?
So basically, there has been a lot of research on both organic and inorganic carbon in soil. Rice University here in the United States, and there's all sorts of academic research going back decades around soil science that exists. The ability to accurately measure 100% of the carbon in soil down through all of the depths of topsoil and some of the substrates even that you would want to be measuring is challenging, right? And doing that accurately is close to impossible. You have to do it based on a model-based approach, right? So what that means is you take core samples in a few areas in different regions and make sure you're in the same soil types, and you get like an average basically across that area, and then you apply it to all this. So all of that does exist, right? Those are all sort of known factors. The carbon indexes that are the measurements of carbon, the carbon capacity, carrying capacity for different types of soils under different conditions, adds in almost tens of thousands of other variables that you have to keep track of and really focus on. So it's a very complicated science.
Right.
Okay. But you can create very accurate, very clear measurements of soil down to specific depths, like right in the exact roots, in the areas where you're interacting with root systems, for example, based on things like using ground penetrating radar and all different other types of technologies. There's evaporative soil transpiration, and there's just any number of different methodologies that exist for how to do that type of thing. And what that does is to take a reasonable approach to this, which is to say, okay, we're not even going to try to accurately predict and model all of the soil, all of the carbon in all of the soil. We're just going to start with what we can actually realistically and with validity measure now. So start with what you can, and don't let the great or the perfect be the enemy of the good. Right. And what I'm talking about, great versus good, I'm just talking about what percentage of the overall. So what we do is we only report out and we only create carbon credits based on what we can actually measure.
And so how are you doing that with all of these small scale farmers? What are the measurement approaches in this sequestration unit that you're selling?
So we're very quickly getting into an area where I don't have a lot of expertise, just to be clear. So
but how do people prove the sequestration or removal unit that ReSeed is selling?
So basically, we, through a combination of the ground-based reporting of the vegetation and soil treatment data that we get from our farmers. Those are the seeds they're planting into our data ecosystem. Basically, we are able to use remote sensing, satellite data of many different forms, and then lots of other data that we collect about soil types, which, we know the soil types down to very high degree of resolution all around the planet. We look at the amount of water that is stored in there, and we look at evapotranspirative measurement, which I've probably just said the precise version of it wrong, because I'm not a soil scientist and I do apologize. But basically, by using different methods that are scientifically valid, we are able to use that combination of data to come up with an accurate view of the soil, the carbon in the soil that we can see, right? And if we can't see it, we don't model it. And that's important, right? Because a lot of other systems are based on, that, as I mentioned, a core sample, one core sample every square kilometer, or something like that. And then to just model out based on the averages across all those different square kilometers that you're doing those core samples. But that core sampling is very, very expensive. And it doesn't account for the variability that you find in agriculture and land use. So we are excited about the future. The future is that soon companies will develop, and we've seen lots of good research prototypes of this, a cheap, IoT type device that you could just like plop in the ground on your farm, and literally it has the ability to measure accurately all of the carbon and lots of other soil characteristics down to a deep depth, and for depending on the technology that people are promoting right now, anywhere from 10 meters to sometimes much, much further out, based on different technologies. And not an expert on how those work, but once those are cheap enough, and once they are, we have the ability to stick those things in the ground, or if there's other technologies that, as satellite data gets better, our protocol is flexible in that we can adapt and basically pull out the Lego piece that was the old way of doing it and plug in the new way, and make sure it's part of the public consultation and all the other things that we do in our documentation. But by doing that, it allows us to evolve as technology improves.
Yeah. I accept the premise that there's a huge opportunity here to sequester carbon in the soil.
Yes.
And that we need to focus on soil health. And I also am very much seeing the same thing in terms of the development of the tools in this arena are coming,
yes,
and are going to continue to advance. And so we can plan for those advancements and we'll have better measurements. However, I guess I'd push back, or at least point out that like the consensus that is in the world that I see is that we don't yet have solid enough ways to measure this at scale in order to create credits based on them. And so I'm wondering, like, you're bringing to market a credit that is unique in that respect.
It is, in that we're measuring what we can measure. It's
right.
the carbon,
the leading indicators that you can collect.
And the carbon in vegetation, and then the carbon in the soil that we're able to measure. And if we're not able to measure it accurately according to standards that exist in the world for measuring that soil carbon, we don't do it. What folks are, I think, obsessing about is the perfect, right? Is, well, we can't accurately tell you within this square kilometer, down to a depth of 30 meters, every bit of carbon that's there. And we can't distinguish, it's very difficult to distinguish between organic and inorganic and what was already there and what is being brought down.
Yeah.
I mean, just all kinds of questions. Totally agree.
Yeah, life is complex, and don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Absolutely.
And we're never going to know 100% of everything.
The fact of the matter is that we know, the one thing we know, and this is also scientific fact, regenerative agriculture causes way more carbon, healthier soils to be created, increases crop output, creates healthier biodiversity, and biodiversity flourishes in a regenerative agriculture environment. Those are all, more water is retained and stored in those soils. These are all evidentiary benefits, basically, of the fact that, and carbon, I would actually argue in the big picture, was the wrong metric to pick. Right? We could have picked other metrics to base this entire economic system on. And there is a shift away from carbon and to biodiversity credits and to other types of things.
I want to get to that. Let me ask you one more quick question.
No problem.
Just in terms of playing through all the potential pushbacks here. So the incentive alignment question, which is, and I totally appreciate you're a fairly new company, and that you're approaching these methodologies from a standards-based and open approach. So you've somewhat already answered it. But I guess the question is, don't you have an incentive to effectively tell that farmer or to verify as many tons of carbon as possible? And isn't that incentive from a demand side and a buyer side also there to pat themselves on the back and say, look how much we're sequestering? Like, where's the accountability to ensure that it absolutely is effective and working?
Yeah, so accountability is actually at the core center of what we do, right? Our entire reputation, our entire business model, our ability to make money only exists if we have accountability in our system. So how do you do that? And these are recommendations that are widely accepted that need to happen, and most people don't know how to do it. And this is where we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, which is have open and transparent data. Right? So right now in the legacy carbon market, most people don't realize this. There is not a digital trail of data that can be tracked from start to finish to be a part of any of the well-accepted verifying bodies in the world, the standards that exist in the world. All of them require PDFs or paper documents, non-structured information and data. Most project development documents in the carbon market, up until this point, have been all based on references to chapters in books and, articles, and, nothing wrong with citations. But the fact of the matter is that there's not actual auditable data that you can go in and create a full audit around. What they do is they have third-party verifiers in those models, and we work with the same third-party verifiers. So we have third-party verification that takes place of that ReSeed did what they said they were going to do, the farmers on the ground did, and the farmers don't actually have to do a lot we don't have to verify a lot of actions. If they choose to plant a bunch of trees on their property, they can do that, but they're not being compensated because they planted those trees based on future, potential for carbon. So because it's all performance-based, there's a lot less claims actually that need to be verified, which is good. It simplifies the process. And you don't have to believe us. Our customers have fully auditable back end into the data, the raw data. We use blockchain specifically to store the logging of the transactions, these assets, which are the data assets. Every time data is collected, moves from one form to another, a transformation is made to that data, it's logged to the blockchain and in an auditable record that large auditing firms can come in for our corporations and audit themselves. And so all we know to do is to do what you do in science, which is you show your work.
Right.
And right now, the carbon industry for the past 40 years has not shown its work. It has not been a scientific methodology. It's been a financial methodology. So yes, could we, I agree with the premise of what you've said. We are theoretically incentivized, right, to maximize the number of carbon credits that are coming through and get as high of a price for them as possible. Our customers want to be able to tell the stories of all the social impact and good that they've done in the world. And all of that exists. But if there's a lack of accountability, if there's a lack of trust in the function of what we're doing, we're no better than any of the existing carbon market players, and that's not going to be the future.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we're running long, and I appreciate you, going through my litany of questions, because I do think the impetus is on us in the space to make sure that we're really starting these things out on the right foot.
Absolutely.
And overcoming the objections of the past. So you've kind of alluded to it a couple times, and I want to leave a bit of space for, okay, so, carbon may not have even been the right thing to focus on, but we're hacking capitalism and markets as we know it, and that's what, where we currently are. But it seems like this model scales to other credit class types. How are you thinking about that? How are you thinking about water credits or biodiversity credits and so forth?
So we see that there is an entire spectrum of utility and demand for the types of data that we are able to collect from individual farmers. And so with that comes a great deal of navigation that we have to do to figure out how do we take that raw ingredients or a set of raw ingredients and turn it into something that companies or individuals will want to buy. So carbon credits, that's the part of the market that, we're taking the carbon, that's the part that we've been talking about the most. But there are many other forms, not just of credits, but actually of certifications that companies have. And so if you think about it, there are, if we were to pick up any consumer product these days, there's a bunch of labels on the back of certifications of different things. There's kosher certification, there's organic certification, there's in Europe now, they just introduced deforestation-free certification. So it turns out many of those, especially the bigger ones, like fair trade or GMO-free, there are great organizations out there and companies that certify for those. But when it comes to newer types of things that people care about, like were people harmed in the making of this product? Were ecosystems destroyed? Were forests left intact? The EU has this certification we're very excited about. That's deforestation-free certification. And basically, if you import a consumer product into the EU, there's a bunch of rules, but basically you have to show that forests were not cut down to make that product. Right. We have the ability in our current data that we have already from all of our farmers to declare whether those farms are deforestation-free or not. Right. We literally can tell when individual trees are cut down in our forests or fall down in the forested areas of our farms. So we love the fact that we're not just selling carbon credits. Many companies have very large targets associated with improving the lives of communities in which they work. Well, how do they quantify that? They might want to look at the socioeconomic impact data that we're able to provide from the ground level. We only provide it in aggregate form, so all of this data is not tied back to a specific farmer, identifiably in the system, and that's important actually to do. It is in the back end, we have the ability to do that, but when we're talking about deforestation-free, when we're talking about some of these other ones, we're able to certify communities, for example, in some of these ways. And so there's a lot of really interesting future that value that companies are starting to realize. Like we've for many of the food companies that we work with, the stability of their supply chain is what's actually more important to them, because they need to, if you are a chocolate company right now, you are very worried that we are losing cacao growers, which are almost all smallholder farmers around the world, at alarming rates. So that threatens your future supply. And so the largest chocolate companies that are publicly traded talk about this all the time, right? It's one of the biggest threats that they face in their market. And so basically, we're able to help them report that actually the reasons that you already know your farmers are leaving the land, right? Which isn't just about cacao. It's about the socioeconomic conditions and the fact that they feel vulnerable, they may feel unsafe, there could be political pressures, whatever. We have the ability to measure how capital that you deploy into those communities through buying certifications of different types on top of the price of carbon, for example, leads to increased income, leads to better outcomes for those farmers and communities. And, we've been talking in generalities up until this point, but it's really important to understand that all of these principles and all of these scientific methods and the financial systems, they all relate down to individuals, right? And the farmers that we work with are some of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. And I can tell you are some of the best business people I've ever met. And, I think of one of our farmers in Brazil is a woman named Sandra Braga. Her family has lived on, she is descended, she's part of the Quilombola community in Brazil, and she is a descendant of escaped enslaved people. As part of the African slave trade. And her family, over almost 300 years ago, escaped slavery, escaped into the woods, basically, and happens now to be, just south of Brasilia, where that family land is. They've been farming this land for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
The soil on their land is deeper, richer, healthier, so much more productive than any of the industrial farm activities that are happening around them. They're an oasis for hundreds of different species of plants to grow in combination with each other. And Sandra and her family passed down through generations. They know to plant the quince plants in this exact area of land because that's where the soil is that will grow it the best. And if you put this over here and if you co-plant these things together, it's almost magical, right, in what they're doing. But it's the deepest science that could exist in showing the future that we want. And these farmers, Sandra has had her life threatened. She's had innumerable threats, both economic, physical, and political, placed on her. The mayor of the town that was created around her farm ended up taking the land that was her family's land when her parents died. Right? Just took it over. And she and her sister were pushed off and they were left with much smaller. The encroachment that has happened on them has happened systemically for easily 100 or more years. And so what we've been able to do by working with Sandra, she was the first farmer to sign up with our program. And basically, as we've been tracking the progress of her land, Sandra has been an outspoken spokesperson for this work. And, she is our business partner, right? She's not some recipient of a grant that is out, arm's length or whatever. She's our business partner. We hear from Sandra all the time with suggestions and ideas. Sandra loves to tell anyone who will listen about this great new program that's helping her stay on her land. And we've been able to generate, I think it's now over 1,000 metric tons of carbon credits from her land. And her annual household income has nearly doubled as a result, right? As those are being sold. And that impact allows her to literally, provide medical, more advanced medical care and access, gain access to medical care for her family. It allows her to make sure that her family has all of the skills that they need, the education and the access to financial services and banking and all the other things that allow them to increase and improve their livelihood. And this is happening just with the initial pilot project work we're doing with over 10,000 farmers. And we hope to be at hundreds of thousands, if not millions of farmers in the next year or two. And that scale, this program, it's not a Brazil program. It's not a Quilombola only program. This is something that, we're starting work in Africa, in countries throughout Africa, throughout Central and South America. And as I mentioned, we're now looking at entering into the US market to work with the most impoverished smallholder farmers that are most at risk. And this model scales. It's the least expensive possible way with all the technology stack stuff that we do, our digital MRV and all the fancy stuff that we're doing is fractional in cost to what it costs per ton to produce, a ton of carbon out of a mechanical carbon capture plant and will be likely for the next 20 years. So maybe we should double, triple, quadruple, infinitely down on this form of carbon work because it's going to lead to so many co-benefits that we need. And the science will improve, our measurements will improve, and the methodology that we've created and the protocol that we will created will adapt over time to get better and better, but we can start now. And that's the most important thing, because the Sandras of the world, who are not us, right? Who are not the people who are stable in our lives and traveling to Climate Week and doing all the things that we're able to do. They're the ones that are literally dying on the front lines of the fight against climate change. And we need their help. And we have the ability to enroll them and to partner with them to get climate change turned around. And it is one solution among many that need to happen. We know this is not the only answer to climate change, but it is one tool that can be used where we can reach 600 million farms globally. We can sequester, not just prove the protection of, gigatons of carbon if we're able to get up to the volume of millions of farmers engaging in this activity globally. And that is a future I want to see. And, we're trying to do our part to make that happen.
Josh Knauer, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, let us know what you thought of that discussion with Josh. You can leave us a comment below or come engage more deeply in our community Discord. To learn more about ReSeed, just go to reseed.farm. There's a link in the show notes. And for more on the carbon markets, check out our conversations with Diego Saez-Gil from Pachama, Troy Carter of Earthshot, and Rez from Solid World. Everything can be found at maearth.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.